So, Carlo, let me just briefly introduce Carlo Jäger. As you will recognize in a second, he's Swiss. He can't hide it. In whatever language he is speaking, you know he's Swiss. He's an economist by trade, but he has worked in many different contexts for a long time at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Implications, or whatever that was called, the PIC. And then, based on that and the realization of the limitations of those institutional or rigid institutional environments, he established with some of the leading climate researchers the Global Climate Forum in Berlin, which is, however you want to call it, an NGO or a think tank that does, not unlike the Hub, very interesting work in that area. He is also affiliated with us here at Arizona State, with the Complexity Science Hub, and spends about 2 or 3 months a year in China as a guest of the Chinese government. So he has a very global perspective on this. Carlo.
Thank you, Manfred. I just wait for instructions from the high-tech people. But I can start and you tell me when you are done there. He said, I'm Swiss, which is true, and you know that Voltaire said, if you see a Swiss jumping from the 10th floor, jump too, there's at least 10% of return. But now I'm a guest of Austria, and therefore I want to make a remark about the people who keep claiming that the world is getting more and more complex. I don't buy that. As far as I'm concerned, I think an intercontinental ballistic missile is a pretty complex thing, but Mozart's Jupiter Symphony is by far more complex. I don't think there are more complex things today. What I do think, and that's really the topic I'm driving at, is that the world is getting, the world we humans are creating in the Anthroposphere is getting complex in a weird, and I would actually say wrong way. You go quietly, and I know it by heart. It reminds me of when I applied for the first professorship in my life and I had to give a lecture and my future depended on it, and this thing didn't work. So I got it. It's fine. Let me just keep talking, because in music, there's the classical form where you have a first part, which is rather fast, a middle part, which is slow, and the last part, which is fast again. I'll do exactly the opposite. A slow part, a fast part, and a slow part. And we'll see whether something happens here. If not, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I would like you to consider a certain kind of decision situation that we are all familiar with, or at least know about. The first is the financial crisis. In 2007, 2008, lots of things happened, and they got faster and faster and faster, and people had to take decisions on very, very short notice. My preferred example is Angela Merkel, who got a call from the German Federal Bank, the European Central Bank, the German branch of it, and they showed her the statistics of German citizens going to the ATM machines and taking cash out. It was a very clear exponential trend. And they told her, look, we have perhaps a few weeks, perhaps only a few days, and we are in real, real trouble. She's a physicist. Nobody really knows what to do with this crisis. Many people thought they knew, but that's another thing. She decided to go on TV and say, me, as the Chancellor of Germany, I guarantee all your savings. Thank you. So I'm there, you see, the top line. She decided to tell the citizens she will guarantee all the savings. It's one of the biggest and most successful bluffs in the history of financial policy making. She was not entitled in legal terms. She didn't have the means to do it, but it worked. And it was the right thing to do. Frankly, If then the German, the French, and the European Central Bank leaders would have gone on TV and said, we guarantee the European savings, it would have saved us a lot of trouble. They didn't. But what I want you to understand is sometimes in today's world, somebody has to take a decision, has very little time, has not enough, but too much information. You said we don't know, but the reason we don't know is that we have information overflow, which doesn't mean that it wouldn't be good to have some additional information somewhere. But the situation today is you decide in this tsunami of information that's coming towards you. The migration crisis, very similar situation and closer in a way to the reality of Austria. Today we have the urban mobility transition. Think about the diesel scandal in Germany. Think about Elon Musk, who is betting on electric cars. Think about Volkswagen, who is now saying we are going to go fully electric. In the first part, I'll just discuss this example quickly. Tomorrow, we may have the next pandemic. I was once invited in the Vatican City, it was very beautiful, at a calm, quiet seminar on pandemics. It was absolutely scary. It was all very relaxed, very calm, the food was good, but it was basically about the speed at which people will die when the next such thing will start. And people will have to decide. You mentioned that I'm quite familiar with China. I don't want to go too deeply into this, but I want to tell you one example. In China, I know somebody who is head of a big research institute, about 1,000 people, very young guy, very relaxed, extremely smart. And I discussed with him because his institute is in charge of disasters. What kinds of disasters they cover? Everything. Industrial disasters, earthquake, floods, what have you. And after a while, I'd ask him, you didn't mention pandemics. And he said, pandemics are for the military. Don't illude yourself that it's different in our part of the world when it gets real. When Ebola started in some African cities, the military blocked parts of the city. You could enter. Nobody could get out from there. These are not trivial decisions to take. There may be better ways to handle the situation. What I want to discuss with you, now in the first part I give you an example, is the question, do we have the institutions to deal with these kind of decision situations? Because what we discuss as the issue of sustainability, at the end of the day, will not depend on beautiful declarations by international bodies. It will depend on decisions that will be taken under huge pressure by people who have too much information, but perhaps information of the wrong kind. The example that I want to quickly discuss is actually not so dramatic, but a lot depends on it too. The general pattern I want you to share is there are situations where you have to decide when the stakes are huge, conflicting interests matter, options are unclear, the relevant system is poorly understood. Cutting-edge information technology is indispensable and intransparent. Data overflow is pervasive and time is short. Now, today there is 1 billion cars on this planet. A few more, a few less. We know that. We even know where these cars are. There are forecasts. It may be that in less than 100 years, there will be 2 billion cars on the planet. Perhaps not. But if there will be 2 billion cars, which kind of cars will they be? Some people think, Elon Musk, they will be electric cars. Some people think there will be hydrogen cars. Some people think there will be pretty much today's car, but running on synthetic fuels. You don't really know. But you have situations where you have to decide. And there's a myriad of decisions that together will shape what will happen on the planet. Vienna is an interesting place for this. How will we live? Is this the pattern that we will see? Frankly, it's possible. Some of you may know the Blade Runner movie. It gives you certain images. Other people think it will be all bright and little noise and the air will be pure and the cars will be self-driving, etc., etc. There are very different options. Life in cities depends on it. In which direction cities will evolve remains to be seen. Global change, climate change, depends not only, but to a large extent on this. Vienna is a pioneer, along with Copenhagen, perhaps Zurich, but some cities are really watched. You have many policy variables. Some people think you have to increase gasoline prices and everything will be fixed. These are economists. I'm one too. I pled guilty, but I don't believe it. You have all these policy variables and you have more. How do you think, organize your mind, and then decide about it? Now I come to I could go in depth with this car example, I won't. Now I come to the third slow part. There is a method for dealing these kind of problems in today's world. I call it the IMF IPCC style. The International Monetary Fund and the International Panel for Climate Change have a similar way of working. It goes like this. There is digital information processing here, and there is the decision maker here. In between are two kinds of bridging people. First, there are people like the academics, domain specialists that study the relevant systems. In the IMF, these are people who study financial markets, economies, and this kind of thing. In the IPCC, it's people who study the climate system, the biosphere, how does the economy relate to this? These are the domain specialists. They have a huge amount of knowledge. They can produce thousands of pages. No decision maker is able to read these thousands of pages, which is why there's a second group of people. These are professionals who are familiar with the decision-making process. These are the staffers in the financial crisis, for instance, of President Obama, or Claude Trichet in Europe, or Mario Draghi, etc. It's important to understand there are these two kind of people who bridge the gap between the data streams and the decision maker. They don't take the decision. At the end of the day, somebody will say, the buck stops here. I decide this, and then something will happen. And this is a style that is well established. I think it's necessary. I think it's good in the sense of being indispensable. But I also think, and that's the point I want to share with you, that it's absolutely insufficient and it's dangerous if we rely on this interface. We have a few global institutions. In my last slide, stay with me a few more minutes, I will say more about them. One incredibly important global institution is science. The world of universities, research institutes, etc., etc. It's not the most influential, of course, perhaps happily, but it's not. But it is one of the few really influential global institutions on this planet. This is the interface between this institution of science and institutions that take actual decisions with momentous, with huge consequences, very often in the kind of pressure situations that I discussed at the beginning. The limitation of this is exactly time. If you are the President of the United States, and this is real, this was a situation with Lehman Brothers, it's weekend. You know that you have no more than 3 or 4 days to decide whether to save Lehman Brothers or let it go bust. You cannot study thousands of pages, and if you would study them, you would realize that the specialists don't know. They cannot tell you which is the right decision now. You get arguments, pro and con, but this system is not sufficient to deal with the kind of complexity that we human beings are presently creating on this planet. There is another method which is in development. It started in the 70s. I didn't know about it in those days. It started by people in management. There's one institution that really got it going, and that's Arizona State University. There's another institution that made some contributions to advance it further. It's the Global Climate Forum that Manfred mentioned. And there the idea is the following. Build simulation models that embody as much of the knowledge and as much of the ignorance that is presently available. Build the model so that people are represented, including the decision maker. We like this idea that here's a problem, I am the decision maker, I have the overview, I'm in control. This is not the world we live in anymore. The decision maker is part of the process. There is coevolution between not one decision maker, different decision makers, plus the world, the environment, nature, call it as you like. Build models that represent this not in the sense of creating an illusion of certainty, but that confronts a user with both what reasonable people agree on and what reasonable people disagree on. And that's very important. And then today, with information technology, you can carry the process of, what were your words, synthesizing, aggregating, etc., these data streams from the initial stream of bits to visual representations of model output that reacts to the question that the user asks. We have done this in different situations, mainly in America and in Germany. It has also been done in other countries. A group like this is probably already too large. We did it with a group of this size. You can do it. But it's better to have a smaller group, something between 5 and perhaps 25 or 24 of people or something like that. Let them discuss a problem. Let a huge amount of information be available on the computer, but first the people ask questions. Give them policy variables. Let them play with the policy variables. If your models conveys a sense of certainty about what will be the consequences of a decision, then your model is not good enough. The model should confront people with the limited certainty that is available and the open questions that are just part of the situation in which the decision maker has to act. Let me emphasize that I'm not saying one of these two methods is the right one. I think this style has developed over decades, is very valuable, but we should be aware of its limitations. This style is in development right now. It seems to me that being in Vienna, having a problem like traffic, running a decision theater about possible futures of traffic in a city like Vienna, and then you speak about the whole world, about mobility systems, and experimenting with such models is a very important way to develop a different kind of interface between science and decision makers. And this leads me to my last slide, which is now pompous, big. The global institutional setting today is actually, in some sense, easy to grasp. I'm not saying it's not complex, it's hugely complex, but we have world markets, we know it, and world markets shape a lot of our lives. All the technology we are using in this room is all part of these world markets. Keep in mind, world markets include media. Rupert Murdoch gives the gift of what they call information to 4 billion people. 4 billion people are exposed to Rupert Murdoch's data streams. There is a world market for entertainment, for information, for lots of things. Actually, religion also has its market, and so on. There are nation states. A few nation states are incredibly powerful and influential, not many. But there's no organization right now on this planet to match the influence and the power of the United States of America. There was a time when the same was true about Great Britain. Some people hope to get there again, Good luck for them. And then there is science. And you see, with regard to climate, it was science that started the thing. Science managed to convince not all, but some nation states that this is really an important thing. Science managed to convince a very large part of public opinion of people, individuals, and NGOs played a key role there. And then there are these world markets, and there's the question, how will they react, what will happen there? I don't want to go there. What I want to say is, right now, let me see whether I have a laser here that I know how to handle. I don't know. Okay. The interface between nation states and science is of the IMF IPCC style. And right now, we live in a world which, until recently, was very clearly characterized by American hegemony, but now is characterized by the Chinese challenge. Nobody knows where this will lead. Everybody knows what the worst case will be. It's not so obvious that we will be able to avoid the worst case in this whole situation. The interface between science and nation states breaks down at this point. In the United States, it has broken down. It may be somehow amended again. What is interesting is that there is, in today's world, only one really global narrative, and it's the narratives of sustainability. Not saying it's the true narrative. I'm not saying everybody believes it. In the White House, some people don't believe it. But it is a global narrative, and it has a huge influence. And now the problem we have is, if we want to somehow develop the interface between science and perhaps not only nation states, but also world markets, so as to really make a difference, to be really useful, and as Robert Oppenheim said, at the same time technically sweet, we need to be able to handle complexity, to handle information technology, and to some extent we can. But how much understanding do we have? Some people think we understand everything, we just need to act. I hope I could convince you we don't understand everything, and we need to act, but for this we need to develop research in a different way, and we need to develop the interface with the rest of the world in a new way. Thank you for your attention.